Good afternoon, everyone. One more time, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. For those I don't know or haven't had the chance to meet, my name is Kori James. I serve as the director of the Cavaliers' Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement efforts, and I also proudly serve as on the leadership team of BSP Cleveland. So on behalf of the National Society of Black Sports Professionals, as well as the Cavs organization, I want to welcome everyone for being here, and I'm really looking forward to a great conversation with our panelists related to advancing equity in sports. I did want to take a moment and just recognize those from the relevant BSP chapters across the country who are here supporting NBA All-Star. So I'm going to read so I don't leave anyone out. We have people here from BSP Charlotte, Chicago, Columbus, Detroit, Houston, Miami, North Texas, and SoCal. So definitely want to welcome you and thank you for being here. And again, we're just really excited for today's discussion. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to our moderator, BSP National Vice President and NBA Senior Team Talent Advisor, Nicole Britenriker.
Thanks, Kori. Hey, everyone. How are we doing? Can we hear me? Mic's up? We're good to go. Okay, awesome. I am Nicole Britenriker, Senior Team Talent Advisor on our People Inclusion team at the NBA. Also am fortunate to serve on our National Office Leadership team for the Black Sports Professionals. And hopefully today, for those of you attending this event for the first time under a BSP umbrella, you're getting a little taste of the amazing leadership we like to put into the spotlight and really showcase what Black sports professionals are doing in this here sports industry. BSP is also a membership organization where we're looking to connect individuals across the entire national portfolio and truly elevate Black faces in leadership roles, decision-making positions across the sports industry. So today, obviously want to give a little background on the work the NBA and BSP have done historically together before we dive into this very powerful conversation with these National Basketball Association leaders. As the NBA has always had a leading role in BSP's development from our genesis as a grassroots organization to our now elevated status as a 501c6 national nonprofit. And the league and team has always been consistently playing a role, whether it's on our boards, our national office positions, and our 17 plus chapters and growing across the country. So hello again to BSP members in the audience. I want to most recently shout out a partnership we did with NBA leadership in the historic summer of 2020. When so many of our fellow Black colleagues were struggling with much of the national unrest happening around the world. And our organizations responded with a plea to really bring together a conversation tied to social injustice and the systemic and systematic changes in sustainability that were happening across the country. So D&I leadership from the Cavaliers, the Atlanta Hawks, the Dallas Mavericks, and the Pistons hosted a forum of systemic and systematic and sustainable change to really talk about what that looks like. And it was a signature moment for BSP with 600 people attending that event globally. So let's transition to the reason we're here and these leaders to my left. And in the spirit of continuing those conversations today, we want to feature how at the NBA we are committed to diversity and inclusion and feel it's essential to the future of success of our game. And my fellow colleagues to my left here, I would like to invite each of you to introduce yourselves, share a little bit about your roles, and tell us why this conversation is important to you by maybe featuring your commitment to D&I and how it's ingrained in your present work. James, kick us off.
Sure. Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the work that you're doing, Nicole. And in particular, thanks to BSP and all of you for being here for this conversation. My name is James Cadogan. I'm the Executive Director of the National Basketball Social Justice Coalition, which is the NBA's advocacy arm. And we spend our time thinking about public policy. How do we take what we've seen around the country over the past couple of years, where we've seen a renewed vested interest in racial and social justice that owes a debt to decades, if not centuries, of work by those who came before us, and turn that into a real actionable change in state houses, in legislatures, in policy and regulation. So I spend all of my time thinking about policy and politics, which is my background. I come from the world of government advocacy. I spent the better part of 8 years in the Obama administration at the Department of Justice. I've worked at Legal Defense Fund and in philanthropy advocacy. And the through line of those things to getting to this point is that each of them I was asked to think about civil rights, social justice, and racial justice from a different lens. And so to be now part of the NBA community, leading the National Basketball Social Justice Coalition, a joint venture of the NBA, the National Basketball Players Association, the National Basketball Coaches Association, is a true privilege because the power that this community has, the power that we see in sports and entertainment, is unmatched. That ability to connect with people, to bring people together, allows us to have the conversations that we need to have as a collective, as communities, and as a nation. So as I think about my work, I am privileged and pleased to be joining the sports and entertainment community and trying to drive the policy and political conversations that we need to open up spaces for the kinds of progress on racial and social justice that I know we all want to see.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. Kori.
James, it's very inspiring. Thank you all for having us. Thank you, BSP. Thank you all for being here. I know the weather's not so great. I'm super excited to be here this weekend for All-Star Weekend. My name is Kori Davis Porter. I'm Senior Vice President of Business Operations for our Global Partnerships and Media Group. And what does that mean? It's two sides of our business from a revenue generating standpoint, both global partnerships and media distribution. My background, actually, this is my 28th season with the NBA. I started out at the NBA as a game logger with the goal of producing sports-related shows and features for the NBA. And I came to the NBA and have gone way beyond what I set out to do. I mean, I had a good 12 to 15 years of producing our shows, our original Inside Stuff show back in the 90s to documentaries that we've done with our network partners, and then transitioned into more the business operations side, basically taking a leadership role in helping the president run our business from a resources standpoint, budgets, finances. And so this is so important to me because, as I said, I've been here 28 years. So I came in as a game logger, and when I came in as a game logger, there was not many people that looked like me. So I did have to navigate my way through. There was no, even in college, it wasn't like a sports management program at the time. Then I had to kind of figure out what to do. But the good thing was I would have to go out and get real world experience in order to do that. And so seeing where we are now, hearing what James is doing, and you'll hear what some of the others are doing, I'm just thrilled to see the progress that we've made in this area. And I'm very active outside of what I do in our employee resource teams, with our Dream in Color, which is our Black employee network, our women's network, just really trying to create opportunities because I knew what I had to go through just to be sure to get certain opportunities that other people had as well. So I just feel like now it's like with everything that's happened in the last few years, it's a good transition for us to really focus on these certain areas. And that's why it's so important to me moving forward.
Morgan, join us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Morgan Cato. My career is very similar to Kori. I work across our basketball business. I'm the Associate Vice President for Business Operations with League Operations. So essentially, I spend a lot of my time with the connective tissue for the on-court product known as basketball that you all love. Similar to Kori's perspective, I too know what it's like to be one of the few people that look like me in a room, particularly sitting in rooms with GMs, with coaches, officials, et cetera. And I have the pleasure of trying to shift that narrative. So essentially, my day-to-day spans essentially connective tissue with our teams, with our coaches, our officials, growing the game, and strategically making an impact across the world through basketball. I spend quite a bit of time focused on rules, decorum, and anything in between that. If you guys, I'm sure, are sports fans, everyone has a different perspective on what we do right and what we do wrong. Essentially, my job is closing the gaps. My job is working with Greg, working with Kori around how the game is perceived, working with Greg and others around how players receive the game, working with our coaches around advocacy and mobility, and then more than anything, what's close and dear to me is expanding the game into Africa. So I've had the honor of essentially being part of the inaugural team to launch our Basketball Africa League, spent close to 6-7 weeks last spring in Rwanda, essentially nuts and bolts of basketball and helping us to continue growing the space. I think it's important for us to continue having conversations like this, but I also hope one day that we won't continue to have conversations like this. I think that this pandemic has created a hypersensitive awareness and an acute awareness of how we show up on screens. I remember sitting in rooms, virtual rooms, and then recognize essentially what I look like when I'm spanning through screens, and I am one of very few Black people, in many cases, the only woman of color on screen. So I'm hoping that more conversations like this shift the narrative around head count, checking boxes around diversity and inclusion, and that as we stand up with our crafts, we're recognized for the work that we do.
Fantastic. Thank you, Morgan. Greg.
Yeah, let me lend my voice and say thank you for all for coming out. Greg Taylor, I'm the executive director of the NBA Foundation, which is the first ever charitable arm of the NBA, the mission of which is expanding economic opportunity for Black youth 14 to 24. I think like my colleagues, a couple things I would just say, I'm in my 8.5 years at the league. I used to be over player development, so I was on the player side, helping to educate the players to understand how to maximize life in the league, social media, mental health and wellness, healthy relationships and the like. So have a really deep understanding and relationship base actually with the players. Prior to the NBA, about 20 plus years in the foundation community. And so when the league decided that we were going to create a philanthropic arm, I was able to step into that role. I guess what I would say to answer the core question, two things. One, we're really blessed to be in an era where our players understand that their platform and their voice around issues of social justice is a powerful basis. From the everyday player to our mega superstars, social justice is an issue that they are interested in. And so that coupled with our leadership, our owners and others wanting to do something in response to what I would say is the moment of social reckoning around the murder of Black leaders, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor and others, we created this charitable arm. And so every day, what me and my small mighty team, Della and Lauren are in the audience, what we do every day is to live out this mission of trying to make sure that there's equitable and equal opportunity for Black youth in the economic development space. And so fundamentally committed to this work. And how do we utilize the NBA's platform to highlight what many very strong organizations that have already been in this work far longer than we are doing in our NBA markets is the mission and goal of our work, with the outcome being to help young people get those economic opportunities. So really glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. I want us to focus on the vast range of impact that these individuals are working in from a vertical department perspective and the impact they have specifically to increase representation and obviously make change from a government decision-making perspective on the social justice side, and then the philanthropy arm. And I want to shift back to Morgan and Kori, who are tenured leaders on this panel, talking specifically to the two functions that we're most familiar with on the outside world of the NBA, which would obviously be the basketball piece and then the business piece. Morgan, maybe kick us off and talk about the culture shifts and change that you've seen during your time, and maybe highlight some of the pieces most significantly that you're able to contribute to from a race, ethnicity, diversity impact.
No, that's a great question, Nicole. I think the biggest shift, particularly over the past 2 to 3 seasons, is awareness and visibility. I think as many of us have experienced the pandemic, there have been highs and lows, but what it has done is it's created an acute awareness and visibility for people who sometimes were not visible. We've created additional platforms for our coaches. As Greg talks about the awareness and empowerment of players, now we're using social media, we're using the court to really stand up and speak out for things that actually matter to our fans, to future players, to future coaches, et cetera. So what I appreciate, I think, the most about this is when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, right? So where we've been asking for a platform to essentially highlight the amazing grace that comes with basketball, you're now getting to understand a bit more of the storytelling and the people behind it. You're now understanding the pathways of different coaches. You're understanding, the home community and background of our players and our officials. We're making more connectivity to our HBCU communities and essentially creating a platform for people of color who may have been typecasted or positioned to professional development work or, video coordinating, or players that if they didn't come from this system, they wouldn't have had an opportunity. So I think the most organic shift now attributes mostly to visibility, awareness, all of our basketball stakeholders using their essential platforms for good, and then there's also a degree of togetherness. We've all had the opportunity to work much more closely to continue advancing the game holistically. So I think there's a bright side to this, and I'm looking forward to the upward journey.
You make a great point when you talk about working together holistically and collaborating across verticals, which is truly the example of an organization that has intertwined D&I into the fabric of who they are, right? They're not just taking the book off the shelf to say we're doing D&I today. It's a part of our strategic visions, commitments, goals. Kori, enlighten us on the business side, some of the aspects of the D&I work that we're committed to that kind of trickle into the basketball side and our other areas.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Morgan on all the shifts, and what it also has done is create relationships with our partners and meet our partners, our business partners, to collaborate on how we can best support this area of our business. I just look back to the past few years and all that we've had to deal with social justice, and how we just really work very closely with our networks on how to get the right stories out there, how to partner with the right areas of our business to be on the same page and align with what we want to get out there for people to see. We've also had global partnerships where we've done programs such as Answering the Call to be sure to partner with minority companies, be able to expose them, use our platforms to be able to do that, and most importantly, work with our players, as Greg mentioned, with the Players Association, to make sure we're all on the same page. So I think from a business perspective, it hasn't been an easy road. Right. Like, it never, and if it is, then it's probably, you have to elevate it if that's the case. Right. But I always say I take little wins and big wins, and I'm just absolutely thrilled to be able to sit here and have this conversation, and also be able to do it with colleagues that we're all working towards this mission. I have to tell you, it wasn't like, from a content perspective, 2 years ago, there wasn't really sort of a social justice area of content. We now are really focused on that, and I work with a content team to manage our social justice content. That's like an actual area of our business. And we're looked at as experts in this area in terms of how we want to put our content out there. And so to me, that's progress. To me, that's a shift that didn't exist a few years ago.
So how did we get there, right? Obviously, there's some pressure probably externally. The world's changed and shifted a little bit and allowed doors to open that maybe weren't even considered whispered conversations in the past, despite internal employees potentially asking for representation. How have you all been able to contribute to that shift, or what helped to move the needle?
I'm happy to start. I mean, I think honestly, it started with courage to have some really challenging conversations with leadership. In order to start shifting the narrative, I think it's important to, pull a coattail, and help someone to understand the perspective of others. And that does not happen overnight. I mean, we've all been in series of conversations with others who may not have understood the impact of marginalized conversations or marginalized pitches or talent. So having the courage to at least start the dialogue and work with amazing leaders who want to understand and understand that there is more talent to tap into, I think has really been part of the organic work. But it does take time.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'll just add a couple things. So we get a lot of credit at the league for being one of the more progressive leagues, right? And I suppose that's true, although I think we get more credit than we fully earn, to be honest. But I would take you back to that moment when the Milwaukee Bucks decided not to play in the bubble as the most recent example of, I would say, in this case, player-led external push, right? And I think that, coupled with, we had an incredibly well-organized internal staff, desire to do more in the social justice space. I would argue, remember 2 years ago, the country there were protests in the streets. So I just don't, to whoever said, I think it was Morgan, I don't want to imply that it's been easy. It's been a perfect storm that I would argue our leadership stood up and said, what is it that we can do in response to this moment? But there was player pressure, there was staff pressure, there was societal pressure, and there's also, I would say, we want to be on the right side of history around all these issues. All of that coupled with the journey, the experiences, and all of folk on this panel and others pushing in a way that made sense, got us to this space. And so I often talk about people see the show, but they don't see rehearsal. The behind the scenes to sustain that movement and meet this moment in history has been one of the proudest moments, at least in my career or my life, around the foundation and other bodies of work. But rest assured, it's been an everyday conversation and an everyday struggle and meaning making about why these issues are what they are. And Morgan used the term courage earlier. I think the courage every day to show up and recognize it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back and 3 steps, whatever. Like, that's been what the grind has been. But it's a moment in history, and I think people want to be on the right side of that moment.
And just to Greg's point about the bubble, I mean, like, really understanding what that
Be
was.
clear.
Like we were there, and I mean, for players, coaches, officials to figure out solidarity to say, you know, this is where we're going to take a stand. Recognizing the distribution dollars, the content dollars, player contracts,
Yep.
like all of that came into, you know, effect to really understand like what was going to happen. You know, no one knew what was happening 24 hours from that point. So courage is an essential theme of how we do that, and then to also see the impact of other sports leagues and other organizations right after that. You know, it took a start point.
And that's a risk, right? Like, that was not orchestrated. That was organic.
Correct.
By our
That's right.
players,
That's
by
right.
our team.
right.
And then as a league, right, the supportive stance to then acknowledge that and stand behind our product, which is our athletes, right? So Kori, what?
The only thing I wanted to add, what I found for myself in adding on to everything that they talked about and having been at the league for 28 years, I think for me, it was also my relationships. I felt like the relationships I had developed through the years gave me a platform to be able to speak, you know, how I felt or how I think things should be or how I think we should do things moving forward. And so relationships to me are so key to help create this cultural shift or change that we've been talking about.
Well, that's also kudos to you, right? Because it still takes strength to be willing to open up and be transparent and vulnerable to your peers who probably had a blind eye, like, prior to that. So I want to shift a little bit and talk about how, you know, NBA is also using our collective platform, to many of your points, to really, you know, advance social justice across the portfolio internally and then impact nationally, just change. And James, and even talking back to the philanthropic side, let's talk about the culture shifts you've already seen or influenced or implementing even within your short tenure with the NBA.
Yeah, well, I haven't been at the company 28 years. I've only been here for one. This is my first All-Star weekend. So
28 days, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're all, it doesn't really matter.
I'm like taking it all in.
Dog years.
But I think from my vantage point, I've seen a lot of big institutions, particularly in the political and policy arena, and how they operate, and been fortunate to be inside some very high-functioning organizations and some not. And stepping into this role in particular, my job and our responsibility as a coalition for the NBA community doesn't exist but for the space that staff and players created with that push that Kori and Morgan and Greg talked about. And our ability to be here, to be in our different roles, but working together across disciplines to advance a social impact agenda that is broad, but is diffuse, but is also deep, that is really rare. And so I get to come into the community by virtue of that work and say, hey, there's a lot that we have to do. But we're starting from a position that is far better than a lot of other organizations because of that work. And I think, to Greg's point, it was a perfect storm. And I see part of our responsibility as a social justice coalition to make sure that we don't take that for granted, and that we entrench and institutionalize the sensibility and the sensitivity to racial justice, to social justice, and make sure it manifests not just in the coalition's work externally, but of course through the foundation, of course in our business side and everything that we do. And to me, that's one of the biggest added values, is recognition that we're living in a time of growth and change, and that is going to be uncomfortable for companies and institutions that generally tend to thrive on predictability. But if we're going to meet the moment, if we're going to live up to the responsibility that we have, then we have to get comfortable with that discomfort. And I feel like the fact that we have so many different resources trained on social impact, we have so many different people who are attuned to it and working 2 steps forward, 1 step back to move the needle, says a lot about where we are and says a lot about the possibility that we have to be able to do the kinds of things that we want to do without thinking of them as one-offs or things that are going to fade away. Instead, they're part of our business. They're part of how we do our work.
You made a great point about institutionalizing that work, and I think about some of the commitments that the MBA has made broadly and externally, and are often elevated inside the organization, and that's commitment to increasing our female representation in VP and above roles, specifically with Black women, and then also the broad portfolio of the teams and hiring from a talent acquisition perspective more people of color and women in verticals that we've identified as truly not having representation. And that all lives underneath the Social Justice Task Force umbrella. I don't know if you want to speak to those decisions in leading that commitment and how it kind of rolls into the day-to-day work of the rest of us.
Well, I can certainly touch on a portion of it, but our Social Justice Task Force is a lot bigger than just a coalition. And everybody here has a piece of that puzzle, and there are more folks who spend their time thinking about the various commitments that we have across our business. But I will say what I have seen, particularly from a business side, I think it is very easy for me to talk about D&I and representation and the work that we do in public policy. My day-to-day is thinking about criminal justice and voting rights and policing reform and how we as an MBA community come to those issues which are inherently vested in the well-being of Black folks. And that is, I think, simple for me because that's my mission and mandate. It is harder to divert institutional resources that haven't previously existed into a space of saying, well, what does our racial equity commitment look like across our corporate entity? And that's where the commitments to building a pipeline of people of color and women into our business units is so critically important, and we have that built. I came in and saw a presentation on that very early and was blown away because I've worked corporate side before and had never seen anything as broad or expansive. Nothing is perfect, obviously, but to even be in the space where you have that dedicated pipeline to the revenue generating side of the house is critically important. And so as I sit in my piece of the world, unlike in other jobs that I've held, I don't feel like I have to spread beyond the politics and the policy. Instead, I have to be in partnership with Kori as she's doing her work, in partnership with Morgan as she's doing hers, in partnership with Greg. And I think that's where we see both the most realistic frame of what social impact and D&I really are, that they are not boxes to check, they are not unitary initiatives. They have to be infused into the daily operations of the business. And through that Social Justice Task Force that Nicole referenced, we have a really great starting point for doing all of that work, and it feels like we have an opportunity to build it out further.
Yeah, and when we think about the task force and rolling over into the community aspects of the work, talk to me, Greg, about how we are amplifying the foundation's work into our communities locally and nationally.
Yeah, a couple things I would say. I think first, I guess what I want to really underscore is that in so many conversations in my career, maybe those of you in the audience, the notion has been, what does inequality look like? And I would argue that the lens that was focused on what was happening in our country around Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and other folks, you could not mistake the inequities that existed, right? Period, flat out. It was actually whether lives were valued over other lives, right? And so all of these companies and all of these institutions were trying to have a conversation about, well, what do we have to do in this moment? How do we change mental models about who people are and about what access looks like and the like? And so that's the backdrop to a lot of it. That's what I meant about being on the right side of history. People are grappling with these issues. And so, all these companies that made these bold proclamations, they were going to do stuff in the social justice space, but very few actually operationalize what that commitment means, right? Because it was a PR plug. Well, the NBA, I'm proud to say, really tried to wrestle to the ground what does operationalizing that work mean. And so, Nicole, the first part of your answer to your question is we were really clear that we were centered on Black youth. And that conversation was one that took time to really be thoughtful about why and who and what's the benefit and what are ways in which we could move that forward. Really thoughtful about working in our 28 markets. So we are focused in the 28 MBA markets where we operate because, again, we think we have some added value. We think we can establish impact in those communities over time, and we want to bring capacity to those markets to benefit Black youth. And so that's what the foundation is all about. We're trying to really essentially build three-legged stools between companies, the NBA, and nonprofits in our 28 markets with a commitment to preparing young people for meaningful, and Black youth for meaningful employment, and what does that mean over time. So, that's where we are, and I think in many ways, the operationalizing the work has been about organizing our teams to kind of be swimming in the same direction or towards the same goal. We've been really blessed to identify incredible organizations that have been at this work, both nonprofit and companies, for a long time. We're funded with $300 million over 10 years from our governors. We certainly have a mandate to grow, but the notion being that, the revenue is important, but really what's powerful for us is the influence, is the tables and the new conversations that we can create that kind of remove and change hearts and minds about this issue. That's been the power of our work to date, and we're trying to operationalize that each and every day for lasting and sustained impact over time.
That's fantastic. And I think those commitments, as James initially touched on, span the organization because the task force lives in all functions and encompassing the entire organization's commitments to this change. And I know that that means different things for different verticals, right? So would love to touch on and even circle back to you, Greg, when we think about opportunities for people in this audience, for people across the country to participate in changing the face of our teams in the league from a diverse talent standpoint. What is the foundation doing from a programming standpoint?
Yeah, so we're trying to work with organizations that are identifying young people in our communities and trying to really solidify, both strengthen those institutions and create really discernible pathways towards that meaningful employment. It's not let you go in the wild, wild west and hope you land. Here's the pathway you take in order to obtain that job. And so we're always looking for strong organizations. We have a pretty clear criteria, if you went, led by Adela Ruiz, who's here, who can talk a little bit about like what it is that criteria looks like. So we know our resources are few, and so we want to work with folks who have a long-standing kind of commitment in this work. And so to me, the ways you can get involved, Brian Stevenson talks about proximity, like get out of your offices, get out of communities and spend time in communities that don't look like you. Find out what these issues are, because I would argue we're all woven in the same story, right? And I think that's what has been exposed in this last couple of years. And I think really being clear that unless we all have access, none of us have access, right? And so we have to be really clear about what are those steps that we have. It's not about equality. To me, it's about equity, which means there has to be intentional investment for those communities that have been disinvested, or else we're not stabilizing the opportunity for all. And I think that's where we are right now. And we're just trying to grind and operationalize that commitment each and every day.
I want to highlight real quick one of the amazing programs coming out of the foundation, and just ask, show of hands in the audience, any HBCU grads in the audience or current students? Hey y'all, okay, awesome. Well, today is the final day to apply to the HBCU Fellowship Program coming out of the MBA Foundation, and shout out to Lauren Sales in the audience who has led that charge. Still opportunity to apply to be ingrained into professional development at the MBA across our MBA teams and the league office. So just one way we're activating resources to Black talent.
Yep.
And then let's shift to the business and basketball initiatives on the business and basketball sides of the league. And our Future Sales Stars, our Future Stars program, Sales Stars, shout out Mike Taylor, is also an initiative focused on that talent representation across the leagues and teams. And Morgan, we're about to be halfway through the open application window for the Future Basketball Operations Stars. Can you highlight that for us?
Sure. So to complement the other side of Greg's points around the early career pipelining, there's also a lot of work to be done on the leadership level, particularly when it comes to front office management, and then also the visibility of what it takes to actually lead basketball teams. So the Future Basketball Operations Stars program is an initiative focused on creating opportunities and pipelines for former hoop heads, That's the best way to look at it. So when we look at, a combination of talented athletes who may have, come through the JUCO circuit, who may have played overseas for some times, the folks who were in the elite AAU space, those who may have been team managers, we're talking about high school coaches, et cetera. Folks who have essentially the basketball acumen, the basketball chops, but haven't been afforded the opportunity and the access to be exposed to team leadership. So we're essentially trying to create a pathway for them to come through a one-year training opportunity where they'll receive exclusive training around salary cap management, collective bargaining, scouting, roster construction, player development, et cetera. Work combine, work summer league, and then have the opportunity to essentially work with the team for the full 22-23 season. Okay, these are unique opportunities. They don't happen too often, but we're at least trying to close that gap when it comes to pipelining leadership at teams. When we talk about additional impacts of our social justice experiences, we've had tremendous success on the head coaching search. Just this past summer, you were able to see quite a bit of shift when it comes to head coaching representation and diversifying that. We're seeing now more Black male head coaches in seats. We still have a lot of work to do when it comes to front office management holistically. There's a lot more to be done for women and how women continue to contribute to the basketball spectrum, aside from just, traditional work around team services or player development. We're seeing more women in the cap space. And programs like these will essentially create opportunities for more people to have transferable skills and then be exposed to leadership.
That's fantastic, and fortunate to get to work alongside of all of these individuals to help bring those particular initiatives to life from a recruitment standpoint.
And shout out to Nicole, because what you guys don't see is Nicole is a force to be reckoned with.
Absolutely.
Behind the scenes, essentially, with how we're moving all of these programs. So we couldn't do it without her support and others within our TA function. So
Thanks
thank
to
you,
you.
Nicole.
No, it's absolute group effort, and that's one of my favorite things about the MBA is just the cross collaboration across functions and particular verticals in which we are truly collaborating to bring these initiatives to life. And I haven't walked into a room that D&I wasn't a focus to some aspect or capacity so to see that ingrained, at least how we move forward and do the work now has been refreshing as somebody who's a year into the organization. I do want to, throw it out there as we think about the work going forward. What are the challenges you still see ahead of us? James?
How long do you have? I think one of the biggest challenges, especially from my corner of the world, and I think all of this interlocks and all of the work that we do fits together, it's kind of like puzzle pieces. For me, it's apathy and time. And 2 years ago, so many people were paying attention to and cared about racial and social justice. Some of that was obviously fueled by a pandemic and folks being in quarantine at home and having more time to pay attention to what was going on in the world around them. But now, even in popular opinion surveys and public polling, we see that people's level of attention to racial and social justice has absolutely flatlined. And that's in the space of, a year and a half. And I think we have to be very mindful that in order to have our good intentions manifest into real-world work that actually impacts people and that sustains over the long term, that we have a much steeper hill to climb to maintain public attention. We have a much steeper hill to climb to make sure that the commitments that, as Greg referenced, so many organizations made, that they honored them and that they actually had the right focus and had the impact on the intended communities. And so when we think about the welfare of communities of color, and the work that I do is about the big structures of governance that create space. You can't get a good job if you are coming out of prison and there's no reentry path for you. If you can't vote, then you don't have a voice in our systems of power, right? If you are shot by the police, you're going to have some trouble in putting food on the table for your family. So those are sort of big structural elements that we have to be able to fix at the same time as we work within our individual organizations, within our communities, to find the pathways to success, to open up doors of opportunity. All those things have to fit together. But none of them happen without public backing. None of them happen in silence, and none of them happen without resources. So one of the challenges that I think about constantly is we can do as much good work as we want, and we can seed as much opportunity as we want, but that will die on the vine if people don't care about it, don't continue to invest in it, and don't recognize its importance. So having this kind of conversation and dialogue matters just as much today, if not more, than in a moment of tragedy. Those moments of tragedy are going to happen. It is terrible, and fortunately, if you're a civil rights lawyer and policy wonk like I am, then most of what you do is think about those moments and how you take them and make sure that people don't look away, but that we take meaningful steps beyond that. Those meaningful steps get harder and harder the further you get away, and I think we all have a job to do collectively in treading those paths forward, so that we don't lose the thread, we don't lose the work, and we do sustain over time.
That's powerful.
Drop the mic right there. I mean, I just agree with everything he's saying. And, you know, just internally, I deal with a lot of putting the pieces together internally and connecting the dots internally and getting everybody on the same page. And I think those are the biggest challenges for me, you know, to try to create just lasting, sustainable, and systemic change, is that if you've had people that have been doing things a certain way for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, it's easy for them to fall right back into those habits, you know, which is very much what you're saying, just about public perception as well. Like he was saying, it's just as long as everyone's sort of working together and like, how do we strategize on how to best create something that's going to be lasting, that will continue moving on as you get involved in your work, and it's not as much of a priority, but if we can ingrain it in sort of a day-to-day operational type of thing, then we've done our part, I think, where that's concerned. But those are, to me, the biggest challenges, is sort of getting people to really think differently in a lot of ways, especially from like a content creative perspective on things too, so. She's like, where do I start?
Well, not even to where we start, right? But I think it's also recognizing what forward looks like. To James's point around, you know, the apathy in the space, this is painful work, all right? There is trauma, there is pain associated with seeing people lose lives. There is pain associated with seeing broken families. It's not easy. It's not easy for us to get up and continue to some degree, you know, exploit the trauma of many people who have fallen before us. But where we recognize opportunity and access and a chance to shift the narrative is, I think, where we spend our time. Recognizing the impact of relationship currency in this business on the court is a big shift. I think the more that we spend time in creating a narrative for opportunity and not necessarily relinquishing power from others, but creating opportunity for those who have different initiatives and different perspectives on growing our business, is really where we spend our time. I'll just take a moment to also, you know, acknowledge the impact of saying names. So when we say the name of Mike Taylor, who spends time in our Teambo business, focus on shifting the narrative of ticket sales and revenue generation and what ticket sales and future ticket holders look like in an arena, that's work. When we look at Sandrine and we look at Kyla, who focus on Tessa Enterprises, which is shifting the narrative of women of color and how we impact revenue generation with sport and entertainment on the continent. That's impact. When we look at John Wiggins in the back, who spends time in Canada across MLSE and the Toronto enterprise across all aspects of sport, and then creating more connectivity between the diaspora, the Caribbean, and then bringing it to sport, that's impact. So we need to continue shifting the narrative, focus on where we've had a bit more of our blind spots, you know? So it's not necessarily taking away from power, it's not taking away from the trauma and the pain, but it's creating more of a road for opportunity. So I'm choosing to spend my time focused on that a bit more, and hopefully that makes the load a little bit lighter.
I love that. It's a great mindset to have.
Yeah, it's a big question, but I think, so when I was in player development, one of the main rules of that work was for the player to remove from the player the sense that no one ever told me what the rules were, either spoken or written down or unwritten, right? And so I think that same thread goes into our work now. And so what we're trying to do is just remove the excuses, right? And so oftentimes there's so many folk who want to work at the NBA because of who it is and who we are and, you know, the sex appeal of it all, and I get it. But to have people say that we can't find talented, you know, black students or whatever. So we remove the excuse by creating the fellowship program that Nicole talked about for undergraduate and graduate students at HBCUs. It's the HBCU Classic you'll see tomorrow is a part of that whole effort to create a pipeline for opportunity for those folk, to put our money where our mouth is, if you will. And I think, the challenge that we face is to make sure that we create the systems that are in place to make success more likely for those young people in our work, that, we want to make sure that there's opportunity around. Because, we're in an organization where it's who you know, if your family member was here, if you are, what I mean? And so if you're connected. And so for those who don't have the right name or zip code or whatever success has been defined, it's an uphill battle. We want to level that playing field in a systematic way. And I think what I'm up against, or what I think we're up against in the work, or a concern that keeps me awake, is I don't want that moment of kind of equalizing opportunity to kind of revert back to what is efficient and easy and hiring in your own image and all the things that we're as guilty of any other company. We do a lot to do, I think, to make good progress around those issues, but we have the same challenges as everybody else. And so I think that's really where the work is. I would also say moving the foundation from a startup organization, we're only a year old, to a sustained vertical in our business for years to come is also what keeps me up at night. We're off to a great start, but we've got to systematize who we are and what the foundation is all about, because I don't want to lose progress in the work, basically. So.
That's powerful stuff, and we're going to open it up to questions in just a second here. So have your questions in mind. And my final question to our leadership up here is just advice via all your work experience and leadership in the fields, respectively, advice you'd give to BSP and how to support our members in the work we are doing to better advance racial equity in sports.
I think there's power in networks. And so to the degree to which you have diverse tables of perspectives and ideas, if those tables can organize themselves around a handful of really doable steps moving forward and present that as a united front, that work behind the scenes means it's less disorganized when you get to that next level of movement. I think that's a very, very important role that an organization like BSP can play, so that folks don't get caught up in the muchness of whatever the challenges are, but there's some strategic way to move forward and actually make meaningful accomplishments. I think that organizing behind the scenes and a united front around whatever that agenda is going to be moving forward is one of the greatest lifts that a network or an association like BSP could do around those concrete steps moving forward. Hard to do because everybody comes with lots of ideas, but if you can refine that and be like, here's our united front of how we move towards action, I think that begins to put the next level accountability on the next partner as you move forward.
I would just say I think organizations now are looking for the expertise of organizations like this. So adding on to what he's saying, I just think it's like a moment in time where whatever expertise or ideas that can be brought to an organization to move that particular organization along, is priceless at this point. So we'll leverage that.
I would say just be a friend to somebody in this space. I think there's so much power, and this is absolutely to the networking point. I think everybody needs to be strategic about building their network, and I think organizations like BSP just have such an incredible platform that will be helpful. But I think if you've heard any theme from us, is that we collaborate, and me coming in as the new guy, I got to call Kori up and say, I don't know how to get this done. I don't know how to create content in the MBA context. What do I do? And she doesn't know me from Adam, but helped me work it through. And Morgan introduced me to the ERTs and said, here's what we have in terms of our employee resource teams, and here's how we think you can be helpful, and gave me that glide path. GT I talk to almost every day on, okay, we're building things here that we want to sustain and last and it will matter. When you are able to do that for colleagues and people coming into the space, it pays dividends, and it means that the work you will do will be so much more powerful and so much richer for the communities that we're trying to serve. And I can't say enough that starting with a foundation like BSP, you're going to have great relationships, but being very intentional about giving to those people who are coming in or those who you know in those relationships. I've benefited from that so much, certainly in this role, but I try to do that too, wherever I've been in my career, to be as helpful as possible to people and make sure that you're able to be a shoulder to lean on just as much as you lean on others.
Fantastic advice and suggestions. we will take all of those. Looking at the crowd here, are there questions for our panelists before we wrap? What would you like to know? Please state your name.
I'm Shelley Omilade Bell, the CEO of the Black Girl Ventures Foundation. We are one of the grantees from the NBA Foundation. We're excited to invest in student visionaries.
Awesome.
Focus on economic development. I have a thought and a question. One thought is, when we talk about racial equity, a lot of times we don't ever reference how much systematic oppression also fights to survive just as much as we're fighting to shift it. And so I just wanted to add that to the conversation. And in that light, when we think about that, where I've seen systematic oppression exhaust systematic inclusion or the fight for systematic resolution is in succession planning. And so I'm wondering, how are you in your current roles? And yes, we hope you be there forever. And, and, I think that's great. And a lot of times we have people in organizations that believe and they want to fight too, but they're not all leaders. So my question for you would be, how are you succession planning? How are you raising rebels and thinking about who will lead your legacy after you leave this role?
Love that, raising
That's
rebels.
amazing. I mean, I think that's an amazing question. And I think for me, I mean, I was very fortunate to have people mentor me, take me under their wing, always take the time out. I mean, we were talking about your organization, BSP, and I was just reflecting on how just becoming actively involved in professional organizations in college is what got me kind of where I am today. And so the exhaustion part is partly that, right? It's trying to make sure that you're creating a path to, pay it forward for everyone and get people opportunities, as well as try to change the system at the same time. And my philosophy with my group, I mean, I have a business operations group that basically just has to be a sponge and know everything going on so that we can operationally make things run smoothly. And so I'm all about, I don't have information to hide here. Like, everybody can know what everybody's doing, so we all have this wide vision of what needs to happen, and that allows somebody to take that next step if you need it. Never in my career did I ever think that I would be able to take a sabbatical, right? And we had or HR person come in and create this, if you've been there so many years, you can take 2 months off sabbatical. Nobody listened. We were like, yeah, right, Gradually, people started doing that. People started taking that. And finally, I decided to do it and felt completely confident walking away because I knew that I created just this environment where my team's going to get it done. And if it's not my team, it's going to be somebody else that can cover this or cover that, or they'll have somebody to go to. So I think it's really, opening yourself to be able to be intentional, to, train people if that's what it is, mentor people, but also just communication and being transparent and letting everybody know what's happening and what's going on. That's how we're all going to learn. I learn every day from everybody on this panel, and I've been doing this a really long time, but I think that is what has kept me going these years, is I'm always learning and always finding different ways to think about things and learn them as well. But you hit it on the point. It's absolutely exhausting. James and I were just talking about that on the way over here. But it's also a good exhaustion in a way when you can see, what you've accomplished and what changes, you have been able to help bring to light and try to keep moving forward, and the support of each other. That's about all I can add to that.
One thing on that sparks the exhaustion piece is real, and that takes its toll. And part of what I have tried to focus on, particularly with younger people who have come to work for me, whether it's here or elsewhere, is a recognition and understanding of how long a career is and how challenging the work can be, especially, to Morgan's point, the trauma of doing work in the social justice and social impact spaces. It just takes its toll. And so being very intentional and very clear about this is what the work looks like, and you have to take care of yourself. You also have to be excellent at all times, and balancing those two things is really hard. And so as we build the pipeline of people who are coming up and coming behind us and who are going to be future leaders, certainly my approach has always been, I don't know who's going to be the next dynamo in whatever space I'm in, but I will try to make time for anybody who's interested. It gets harder and harder, but that's just a part of my practice. And with the folks that I do know or that I try to mentor or who I've hired and I'm bringing up, those folks need to understand that the work they're doing is not just for tomorrow, it's not just for this year's KPIs and metrics, it's not just for the end of year, it's for 5 years from now, it's for what you do 10 years from now, it's your contribution to the movement over the course of your life, it's to your personal growth and development in whatever your particular discipline is. And so framing that, I think we've gotten away from a little bit, and this is just my observation, the long-term yield, and we think a lot about tomorrow and next week and leave it there. I always try to frame the long game and say, hey, if you want to do this work and you want to make an impact, you realize that you are fighting against systems. To your point about systemic oppression, we're fighting against those systems that creep back again and again and again, and you've got to be able to think about how you're going to sustain your piece of that work over the course of that fight.
To answer that question more pointedly, like, I strive to be the queen of the assist, okay? So
Come on.
when you say that, like, anything that I do, I focus on trying to empower others. Like, I'm a captain through and through. I want to use my bench. I want to make sure that I'm
Amen.
calling on you on the spot.
That's
Like,
right.
I am the queen of, wait, tell me your opinion. You know, the person that doesn't get a chance to show up, you know, I do what I can to create a spotlight for those that have something to offer and something to contribute. I mean, if
Yeah.
anyone who's been spiritual in their life, they say, I don't look like what I've been through. Girl, I don't look like what I've been through, right? And I want to share my load. Like, I want someone else to be able to have the chance to do what I do. I'm realizing now in this game, I had someone tell me, like, oh, you're an OG. I said, when did I become an OG? Like, when did that happen, right? But there is something to that. We have to make space, and we need to be able to move over because there's more for us to do. I mean, Kori, Greg, and I, like, we've all had different careers here in the NBA, right? So we have to lift as we climb. Like, Greg is now doing amazing work leading the foundation. And with him stepping up, he's created room for Jamila Wideman. Okay, so as I'm moving through my space, I'm creating additional opportunities for people to chime in and shift that narrative. So, you know, figure out the space you want to be. You know, don't hoard your information.
Amen.
Pass it back,
Yeah.
you know, pass it over. Don't be afraid to ask that question because you create opportunity for someone else to essentially succeed. And that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, you actually stole what I was going to say. I mean,
My bad.
like, it's synergy, man. It's synergy, you know. Like, I could be way more visible if I wanted to be. Like, let's just be blunt, right? But I hire incredibly strong people, and my role is to block and tackle for their success. I've been fortunate to build 2 departments at the league, and if you ask any one of those folk, that's my hallmark at the league. I've had my time, and now it's about legacy building, right? And so I want to block and tackle. I want to tell you what the unspoken rule, because the unspoken rules in corporate America will crush you if you don't know them, right? And so I take very seriously how I lead in a way that is opening up space. I love Shelley, the comment about rabble-rousers or whatever the phrase you just used, because I think that's what it's all about. And so it's about providing guidance. It's about providing a platform for folks to lead and literally getting out of their way. And if you look at the way even my current team is run, I've got folks who have been here less than a year that are running the absolute business of our organization. That is all intentional, right? It's not that I can't speak. It's not that I don't want to lead. It's that they are amazing at what they do. And what I'm going to do is commit to their success so that when I leave, which will happen, they're in a position either at the NBA or somewhere else to just fly. And that's where I see my legacy as being.
Awesome. Can we get a round of applause for these individuals, please? Thank you, James, Kori, Morgan, and Greg. That was absolutely fantastic. Very appreciative of your time. And just to bring us home here, I'd like to invite our BSP board member and also a leader out of the Cleveland Cavaliers who are helping host this event today, Kevin Clayton, to wrap us up.
KC.
Thanks, Nicole. Can we give this panel, please, one more round of applause? Thank you. So on behalf of BSP Cleveland, on behalf of the Cavaliers, we welcome you, those of you who aren't from here, to All-Star 2022. Those individuals who are Cavs, Browns, or Guardians, can you stand up, please, in the room? All right. Can we give Cleveland BSP some love? And the thing is, this is maybe like 1/15 of the representation in Cleveland of BSP members. So with that, We want to thank you for being here. A couple of thoughts, though, that I'd just like to share, one of which is the work that our 5 panelists do, we have an opportunity to benefit from that. There are programs that are happening right now today because of what you all have done. So thank you on behalf of Cleveland and the Cavs. Secondly, one of the things in which we've done in Cleveland in connecting not only from a BSP perspective, but coming together to fight the issues of social justice. The reason I have my colleagues from the Browns and the Guardians stand up is that we have, which is the first and only, 3-team alliance that meets with regularity and have been meeting every other week now for well over a year and a half to deal with issues of social justice, education gaps, as well as voting and our civic responsibility. When you go out, you will see several hundred youth law enforcement officers that are lined up, including our mayor who's coming, our chief of police who's coming, to talk about the issues that we began shortly after George Floyd, but also shortly after the support that the league gave us, to begin to deal with the issues that we can do uniquely here. And we have youth that are going to tell the mayor, this is how you can help us to become more aware, more engaged with law enforcement, and law enforcement is going to do the same. So you're welcome to stay for any of that. I will tell you, if you do stay, you will be part of the process of learning as well, because we have these 5 groups broken out, where it's called Conversations for Change. So fortunately, I had the mic. I wanted to give kind of this CL3 a plug. Again, thank you. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy All-Star 2022.
Thanks, everyone.